I'm sure you've heard the saying that Christianity is not a religion, Christianity is a relationship. However, what if I told you that there are moments in the New Testament that it presents a philosophy, or a philosophical way of life? If you've watched as many videos on YouTube as I have, you've probably come across videos on Stoicism. This is an ancient philosophy that's had a resurgence in popularity in our modern times. The practical ethics of Stoicism have inspired numerous videos and blogs, and many today consider themselves modern-day Stoics. Some people have even transformed Stoicism into what some pejoratively call Broicism, a macho, motivational version of Stoicism.
Broic philosophy.
However, most people don't realize that this ancient book we call the New Testament actually has lots of similarities to this ancient philosophy, Stoicism. And so before we can look at these similarities, we need to first understand what is Stoicism.
Yeah, but what do most great philosophers know?
Stoicism began in Athens around 300 BCE with a Stoic philosopher named Zeno of Citium. And one way to quickly explain Stoic philosophy is with a metaphor from Diogenes Laertius. He argued that there were three focal points of Stoic philosophy. There's the logic, which is like the reason, the rhetoric, the thinking, and the grammar, and all of that kind of stuff. Second is the ethics, which is virtuous living. And then third is physics, which is the study of the natural world or nature. Diogenes compares these three areas of Stoic philosophy to a fertile field. Logic being the encircling fence, ethics, the crop, and physics, the soil or the trees. Stoic philosophy wants to make life like a fertile field, and they believe that a proper understanding of logic and physics will produce the fruit or the crop of ethics. So the goal of Stoicism is living in agreement with nature, and one does this through ethical living or being virtuous or practicing the virtues. Now, there are a lot of similarities between the ethics of Stoicism and the ethics in the New Testament, specifically Paul's letters. First, both the Stoics and Paul show a commitment to this ethic of pursuing the common good. Seneca writes in his moral essays, "We shall never cease to work for the common good, to help each and all, to give aid even to our enemies, when our hand is feeble with age." Paul has a similar commitment as well, and he argues that people in Christ should work to bring about good for all people. In Galatians 6, 9-10, he writes, "Let us not grow weary in doing the right thing or the good thing, for we will reap at harvest time if we do not give up. So then, whenever we have an opportunity, let us work for the good of all, and especially for those in the family of faith." And so Paul and the Stoics actually agree. The virtuous life should bring about the good life for all people. Next, this commitment to pursuing the good is exemplified in a radical commitment to love all people, even your enemies. Seneca states, "I am naturally born to love all people. It is a good to the many, but it is also a good to me." Similarly, Epictetus is the most radical Stoic on this topic, and he tells the ideal philosopher to even love their enemies. He writes, "While he is being flogged, he must love the men who flog him, as though they were the father or brother of them all." Of course, this sounds a lot like what Jesus says in the Gospel according to Matthew. In Matthew 5:44, Jesus says, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Paul, too, makes a similar argument more broadly in Romans 12-13. "Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Do not repay evil for evil, but consider what is good or right before all people. Live peaceably with all people. Owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law." And so Romans 12-13 actually works to this point where Paul tells people to love everyone, even your enemies. This is why Dr. Runar and Thorsteinsson says, "The basic framework of Paul's moral teaching in Romans 12-15, as well as many details of that teaching, may well have been understood in a Stoic light, and still can." Additionally, I've also written an article on Paul's ethics of love in 1 Corinthians 13 and its relation to Greco-Roman ethics. In that article, I show that Epictetus and Seneca, both Stoic philosophers, use metaphors in their ethical discourses that are similar to the metaphors that Paul uses in 1 Corinthians 13. And so 1 Corinthians 13 is actually explaining Paul's ethic of love. And he's drawing on Jewish, Greek, and Roman philosophy to do that. And when you look at the specifics of Romans 12-15, you find he's doing something similar as well. Lastly, both Paul and the Stoics treated all people with a common dignity and equality. And this is exemplified in what they thought about slavery. When Seneca talks about slavery, he argues that people who have been enslaved should be treated as free people. Seneca writes, They are slaves, people declare. Nay, rather they are men. Slaves? No, comrades. Slaves? No, they are unpretentious friends. Slaves? No, they are our fellow slaves. If one reflects that fortune has equal rights over slaves and freemen alike. Here Seneca is combating the idea that slaves are less than human. Instead, he argues that people who have been enslaved should be treated with human dignity. And Paul actually does something similar in his letter to Philemon. He urges the slave-holding Philemon to free the enslaved person, Onesimus. Paul challenges Philemon to treat Onesimus like a sibling. He writes, "Perhaps this is the reason he, Onesimus, was separated from you for a while, so that you might have him back forever, no longer as a slave, but more than a slave, a beloved brother, especially to me, but now much more to you, both in the flesh and in the Lord." In Dr. Esau Macaulay's book, Reading While Black, African American Biblical Interpretation as an Exercise in Hope, he insightfully says about this passage, Paul uses familial language, calling Philemon his brother. The point is clear. Oneness in Christ transforms relationships. Society values those with power and status. Christians treat all people, slave, free, or prisoner, as family. This idea that slaves and masters are family undermines slavery. Dr. Mary Ann Thompson also says something similar. Paul seeks here to create a new kind of society, a fellowship of equals, in which the slave owner and the slave were both brothers and sisters in Christ. And so for Paul and for Seneca, there is this common humanity, this common human dignity that allows you to treat all people as equals. Even when people are trapped at the bottom of society, Paul and Seneca both think you should treat them as equals. This is why Paul says in Galatians 3:28, "There is no longer Jew nor Greek, there is no longer slave nor free, there is no longer male and female, for all you all are one in Christ Jesus." Tastes like virtue. Now, Paul was not a Stoic philosopher like Seneca or Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius. He was actually a Second Temple Jewish Pharisee who believed that Jesus was the Messiah. This fundamental conviction makes him different from his fellow Jews and different from ancient Stoics. In Pauline Theology as a Way of Life, a Vision of Human Flourishing, Dr. Joshua Jipp explains the fundamental difference between the Stoics and Paul. Dr. Jipp writes, "For the Stoics, it is a life of virtue and reason in conformity with nature. But for Paul, humanity's supreme good is life with God, a life only available through relation to the person of Christ." And so Dr. Jipp is correct that there's a difference between Paul and the Stoics. But the Stoics actually agree that conformity to nature is conformity to God. Diogenes writes, "The end or the goal may be defined as life in accordance with nature, or in other words, in accordance with our own human nature, as well as that of the universe. That is to say, the right reason which pervades all things, and is identical with this Zeus, Lord and ruler of all that is." And so the difference between Paul and the Stoics was the identity of their God. For the Stoics, God was someone or something else in the universe. In fact, here is Marcus Aurelius, a Stoic philosopher and the Emperor of Rome, offering a sacrifice to Jupiter, the chief god of gods. However, for Paul, the God who governs and orders the cosmos was the God revealed in the Hebrew Scriptures and the God revealed in the person of Jesus the Messiah. This is why Dr. Jipp writes that Paul believes the person of Christ is the supreme good, the ultimate goal of human existence. This is so because Christ has entered into resurrection life, and because relation to and knowledge of Christ is the singular way others will experience the resurrection life with God. And so when you read the New Testament, realize it's not just a spiritual book, it's not just a religious text, it's actually a book that holds within it deep philosophical truths and practical philosophical ethics. In other words, it presents a philosophical way of life. For the Stoics, the practicing of the virtues was living in harmony with nature. For Paul, these ideas were living as a new creation. Belief in Christ was a way of life that leads to human flourishing because it challenges people to work for the common good of all people, to radically love all people, to treat everyone equally, and to break down social classes, liberate captives, and more. Regardless, both Stoic philosophy and early Christian theology challenged people to live a new way of life. They wanted the world to become a bountiful garden where human life could flourish. If you want to read more on Paul's theology and how it relates to ancient philosophy, check out Joshua Jipp's book, Pauline Theology as a Way of Life. He discusses a lot more than just Stoicism, so make sure you check that out. If you like this kind of content, why don't you go over to Patreon and consider becoming a member? You get early access and extended uncut scripts, as well as opportunity for Q&A and more. Of course, the simplest way to support the channel is to subscribe to the channel and to watch this next video. A special thanks to my patrons. Your support means the world to me. Until next time, peace.